Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Filippo Pallaroni, and I'm the Training Center Coordinator at the EU SME Centre. And today I'm going to be the host of this event. Let's start with the agenda. Yeah, so today we are organizing this event on the healthcare sector, and we are in partnership with the Italian and the European Chambers of Commerce that, as I will explain later on, are part of the consortium partner implementing the EU SME Centre. And today's agenda, as you can see here, we're going to have a first speech on the overview of China healthcare sector from Jens Ewert from Deloitte. Secondly, we are going to have the keynote speech on registration procedures for medical device from Hamish King, CEO at Cisema. And finally, we are going to have a panel discussion that's going to be moderated by Valtero Canepa from Bracco Sine Pharmaceutical, where we're going to explore the issue of market access for European SMEs in China. So just before we start with the content of today's event, let me quickly introduce the EU SME Centre. So the EU SME Centre is a project that started in 2010, and it's a EU-funded project that has been going on for 4 different phases. And next month, actually, we are going to conclude the 4th. And the Commission decided to renew the project for additional 3 years that are going to start in July 2025 and in 2028. As you can see here, the main, let's say, principle, the main mission of the EU SME Centre is supporting European SMEs. What does it mean? The European Commission recognized the fact that small and medium enterprises have less resources that they can dedicate to the Chinese market, and therefore decided to finance this project that offers different services for European SMEs. Among the main services that we offer, we have 5. And the first one is the self-diagnosis tool. Therefore, European companies can go on our website and check whether they are ready to enter the Chinese market. So it's a predetermined tool where they can basically ask questions. Okay, let's see if this works. Nice. They can ask questions and receive information on the sector specific where they operate. Second of all, we are a knowledge center. Knowledge center means that we prepare report articles that we share on our website, out of which we organize trainings, such as the one that we are having today, in which we try to tackle different sectors. And for example, today, one of them is healthcare. The third service that we offer for free is advice. So we have an in-house expert who is a business advisor, and every European SME can simply reach out to her and ask whatever question, and then we receive a reply and, in a way, have their doubts solved. Fourth, we are trainings. This is precisely what I'm charged of, and this is why we are here today. So we try to gather different experts, different industry practitioners, and we try to cover these different topics, both from an industry perspective and from a more, let's say, theoretical side. Finally, we are also an advocacy platform, so we tap into the well-established resources of both the Italian and European chambers, and we try to bring the concerns of European SMEs to the government so that we can improve on some issues that we believe are relevant. That was all for my presentation. I think that now I can leave the floor to Jens, who's going to introduce an overview on the healthcare sector in China. Jens, the floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jens Ewert. I'm a French-German national, been based here 23 years. Probably too long already to have a neutral view and objective view on many things in China. I lead in Deloitte. I lead our life science healthcare industry sector. We have a couple of industries where we invest in people and research and so forth and so on. So we got about 700 people that say they want to be recognized as experts. It's not a lot with 20,000 people, right? But 700 more the experienced group of people. So I'm a bit unfamiliar with the group of people in the room and online. So some of the things that I may cover might be a bit trivial, and I apologize for that a little bit. But we may have, I think, in the questions and answer afterwards, a time for deep dive in a couple of things. Okay, so I go for industry updates. I'll give you a bit of a view on how we look at China for China, and then we'll conclude. The first bit is really high level. And there's a couple of takeaways here. First of all, the market size is still. Oh, okay, okay. Okay, okay. Let me ask you to stay here. Okay, but then I don't see anything. Okay, can I stay over there? All right, a couple of takeaways. The first one is the market size. Okay, not surprisingly, with 1.4 billion people, 50 million people that are in the working population, the China market is now the second largest life science healthcare market. Growth is slowing down in both measures. Market includes healthcare services, including, and then the pharma sector only, and we'll come to that a bit later. From an expenditure perspective, keep in mind that it's only 7.2%. In Europe, it's slightly above 10 in most countries. In the US, it's something like 18, nearly close to 20. From a government perspective, of course, nobody wants to reach these levels that are in the US or so. But it has actually grown 50% over the last 10 years. Think about that. You know, it's from 5% GDP percentage points to nearly above 7, and that leads me to the third piece that's on the slide here, which is there have been tremendous policy efforts. Certainly on two areas, on the NRDL, which is the reimbursement list, and the second was the VPB, so the volume-based procurement policies that have actually been pushing a lot innovation, but also cost and price reductions. So right now, the government continues to be driving both of these angles in the industry, and they shape the industry. They have been shaping the industry in the past, let's say, 8 years, and there's no reason to believe that they will not shape the industry going forward as well. Okay, the second piece is on the healthcare angle, on the services side, and I think the takeaway, it's a bit of a busy slide here, but the takeaway is, think about these pyramids, these upside down pyramids, where basically 10% of the hospital are actually covering 60% of the patient needs today. Think about that congestion that we have in the country here, and it's not reducing, actually. We had all hope that actually in the early COVID years that the government would realize that there is something that needs to be done. But myself, I've been experiencing some of those hospitals here in Shanghai not too long ago, and I've seen lots of people with travel bags and luggage there coming in for being covered here in Shanghai, where there is a feel of safety, of competency, but also providing assurance on it. On the other numbers, you know, yeah, of course, hospitals have increased. There have been tremendous infrastructure programs over the past certainly 3 to 4 years now, where the government has been putting billions of renminbi into creating new hospitals and new center of excellence around the country. Actually, nearly one by province, so to say, as well as increasing the population of HCPs. One of the underlying pieces there is that the pay of the HCPs continues to be not just differentiated in the country very much between the tier 3 cities or tier 1 cities and the county level, but also between the various hospitals, and therefore the attractiveness of HCPs, of the quality HCP, so to say, remains in that small fraction of hospitals. Okay, bigger picture. I always like to start with the politics in the country. And this is a bit of a highlight from the last 5-year plan that's going to come to an end. On the left side, where the government had been laying out a couple of things that were really higher on the agenda. So you see that, yes, it was all about supply side reform, innovation, domestic consumption, and so forth and so on. And then on the right side, as we move over there, you actually see the link into the industry and into the life science healthcare industry. And you see actually these little green boxes there, where you can actually make that linkage between the high-level policy into more detailed policies, rules and regulations that are going to cover, access, basically, VPB, NRDL, monitoring and compliance. The smart technology is a big play in the country, as we all know. The opening up and of course innovation, and we're going to cover all of those as we move on. Technology in this place is a bit tricky. Okay, VPB. We're in the 10th round right now. So it's really started in 2018 with pilot programs in various cities. And it has covered actually on the top, you see the coverage on the pharma side, and on the right, on the bottom, it's more on the consumable side and the medtech space. So the 10th round we're in, I say to people, there's no reason to believe that that will not continue. VPB products are generic products. That's a fundamental. That's a given. The underlying many years ago was to say, well, there's no reason why global pharmas should make premium profits on outdated products, so to say, only because of the reason of being safer than others. When you look at the number, I mean, the government has actually been very, very successful, taking out, up to 33.6 billion US on an annual basis. Think about that, 33 billion US dollars every year, reducing the healthcare costs or the pharma costs, right? When you sit on the other side, of course, you kind of think about your lost revenues and so forth and so on, and eventually lost revenues or lost margins, because not everybody has actually lost revenues, but many have lost big time margins, and we'll see that a bit later. Okay, that's the second one, is the NRDL. NRDL. It's a bit more technical, maybe for those that are not completely familiar, is when you want to get into the reimbursement list, which typically allows you a wider access to the market, but also with prices being negotiated or set. And usually, while VPB, I haven't put a number there, but the VPB price reductions typically go from 50 to 85% if you are in VPB. In NRDL, it can go as well above 50 and 60%. It's more in the 50 range, I would say it this way. There's a couple of takeaways. The first one is actually that, and you have to sit back and think about that. The NRDL reimbursement list today covers 56% Western drugs, but 44% TCM, traditional Chinese medicine. This country here, the pharma market, continues to be heavily influenced, and there's a lot of market space for the traditional Chinese medicine here. So when you think about Chinese pharmas or I guess Chinese biotechs and modern pharma as well as global pharma, they only play in a portion of the market. Okay, they don't play in the full market. The second piece is the graph down on the right side, which shows you the inclusion into the new NRDL lists over the past few years by whether you're an MNC that got registered as under the NRDL or whether you're a Chinese company. It's actually an interesting indicator to tell you that innovation has actually elevated significantly over the period past years. You see that in 2024, it was more than 70% were domestic companies that got actually into the list. It's also, you have to realize that sometimes foreign companies try to avoid NRDL, okay? That is a edge with double sword, and I'm sure that Valtero can speak about that, because if you avoid, then usually you get hit eventually somewhere else. So it's a tricky game that you're playing here. Some have actually been able to do that in coming up with kind of substitute products or me too products that they have been teaming up and licensing out some of the molecules to locals and branding that slightly differently, therefore allowing that product to go into NRDL. The third topic is about monitoring. And again, for those that are interested in this deck afterwards, they can come to me individually and I'll share this one. Compliance and monitoring is very high up for everyone and for the government certainly. I alluded to the pay scale in the HCP world that we have here. We had hoped that with COVID that there was a realization that to make that industry more attractive and more transparent. 10 years ago, some of us may remember that a British pharma company got hit at the time, and it took them really 10 years to come back. We can say that. In 2025, they're back on the table, they're back in the market, they're back growing in the market, and have visible products and products that are actually within the hospital systems and promoted duly by the HCPs. In the last year, the government has no longer been continued to be, let me say it this way, continue to be monitoring and ensuring that companies do well in that space and do the right thing and don't cross the red line. But last year, they also went after the HCP world and went into making sure that some of the chiefs of departments, chiefs of hospitals and so forth and so on, were doing the right thing and not crossing the line. That actually for a couple of months changed the world of how you were distributing, how you were engaging the HCP world. So we had to think about different sales and marketing models suddenly when you were a big pharma. So that created a lot of new things over the past 9 to 8 months. We, Deloitte, we do quite a bit of business in that space, actually. The tech space, and I'm listing, I could have done a much bigger table here, but on purpose, I only listed a couple of ones, and I will focus more on the left side of that slide here, where you see the big, the giants in this world here in China. Tencent is the one that is probably the one that I would think is has the widest reach, because they actually have platforms that allow to patient engagement directly. So we call this here 2C, but they also go into the 2B world. And then finally, they recently as well went into the government world with trying to link either smart disease monitoring, but also the payment systems and so forth and so on. JD is one that I want to highlight as well, which is one that has probably the most integrated internet hospital system that covers pre-diagnostic, diagnostic, prescription, and follow-up, and with a physical hospital that's out of Nanjing, and they're running this. All these numbers, all these platforms have hundreds of thousands of subscribers. It's not just 1,000 people, right? So the scale of China is in the back of that. On the right side, Insilico is one that you may have heard in the news recently, because they're still looking at going to IPO, and it's going to come for IPO, I think, is one that is very active in the research and development side of things, and trying to do using data models and so forth and so on to speed up the initial step one in the R&D phase. The other ones are again some of the data management pieces. So you see that the tech space is actually integrated player here in the China life science world. Coming to the end of that section here, and time is running. I'm sorry, I'm a bit over time. Apologies, Valtero. Innovation. we typically, when we talk about Chinese innovation, we look at this in these 4 categories where we see actually people doing a bit of self-development, and by Gene, now called B1, because they changed name recently, at least in outside China, to get a less Chinese name on it. There's co-development, and we see people like the Legend and J&J, very successful platform in the cell gene therapies. We've seen a number of licensing out transactions. Number-wise, 2024, there were about 90-ish licensing out transactions that involve Chinese companies. That's nearly 50% more than the year before. It's a good indicator of how innovation in China is actually being treated. For many years, Chinese innovation in the pharma space has been considered as not being to the quality, right? Now these days, it's no longer just the me too, it's the me better, or sometimes even the me best. So we've seen big numbers being there. And then we also have seen cross-border transactions where Chinese companies, more on the medtech space actually, have been going out and acquiring technologies. Opening up as the final one in this side. Very recently, a number of changes have happened. Will they be very effective is yet to be seen, to be honest. And we as the European Chamber are looking at that and being, of course, advocating for, what's the reality on the ground. Hospitals can now be operated and owned in some cities on a fully owned transaction, fully owned ownership. They have also been opening to HCP. Foreign doctors can now operate in China, in particular hospitals, in particular cities, and so forth and so on. But it's a change, of course, which didn't happen before, right? So the opening up is there. The underlying is clear. We want to continue to speed up innovation and cross-border learning and knowledge space. So that's certainly moves that we've seen very recently. Okay, the China for China. I'm going to give you a quick view on. We do a survey every year. We at Deloitte, where we I call it state of the industry, where we go out. And this year we had about 125 respondents, 60% foreign companies, 40% domestic, in which we asked them a couple of questions, not just of how have you done, but also how will you do in the future, and a number of more technical questions around how do you manage data, how do you manage your teams, and so forth and so on. It's available on our website if you're interested. The snapshot here that I'm giving you is the outlook for 2025. So I'm not really looking back. So you see these green bar charts, and on the left side you see the pharma space, on the right side you see the medical device space, and you see that these numbers are quite different actually between medical devices and biopharma. On the pharma side, you actually see that in 2025, very few are thinking of having a declining business, right? It's more of a brighter outlook actually. It's also because the foreign pharma, the pharmas in general, even the Hengri and so forth and so on, have really adopted the Chinese policy perspective on we bring innovative products to the market. And therefore, with innovative drugs to the market, you're driving growth at the end of the day, okay? On the device side, there's tremendous domestic competition. And we'll see that just a bit later. So you see actually that the declining mode, there's still 14% of people that believe that they have a declining business. So you have to think about that. 14% is a big number, right? When you look at that. On the bright side there as well, the outlook is somewhat slightly better on the high end, where you have innovative solutions. When you're sitting in the middle, in the bulk part of the market, the outlook is slightly less bright. encourage you to go into that. It's probably too busy if we don't have time for that. Let me just cover this one here. Global pharmas and how they actually and where they play in the market. So they have about, foreign pharmas have about 30% market share in the hospital space and 30% market share in the retail space. Slightly less, I mean, I rounded up, right? So it's 7% on the hospital space and 22 on the retail space. Global pharmas across the board, and again, there's rounded numbers. There's a couple of ones that kind of stand out, the big gorillas in town. So AstraZeneca and MSD are the ones that are kind of standing out with 10+% of their global business being exposed to China, while most of the others are actually more in the range of 5 to 7. Very few are doing more than 5 to 7% of their global business in China. On the medtech space, you really have data available just for a handful, so I can only comment on a few here. The space they have is slightly larger, but when you look at the categories where domestic players have market share, you know, whether it's imaging or IVD devices and so forth and so on, you see that the domestic players have 80% plus market share. So the 10% that a GE Health or a Medtronic is playing is actually a small space. And needless to say that some of them are sitting in the middle of the trade and tariff discussions that we have right now. When we talk about foreign companies and how they look at the market, we can actually separate them into, or we can get the storytelling around those that are really kind of a bit more doubling down, those that are trying to be more local or doing stuff that would be looking like a local, and then there's others that would be doing de-risking. Some of the farmers, depending on the portfolio, they actually choose to play in various categories. So for an older portfolio, they may actually go into the de-risking. Sanofi, for example, did a transaction not too long ago where they basically outsourced or kind of sold off a large part of their portfolio to a Chinese large distribution company, Shanghai Pharma, not to mention them. But at the same time, you know, Sanofi also plays in the doubling down with announcing publicly a fairly large investment in Beijing in the insulin factories. So you see that I guess the key message here is the farmers are really, the global farmers are really looking at the market these days through the lens of their own particular portfolio and making choices as to what they do with them. It's no longer just a company as a whole. To sum up, okay, we're getting there. Thanks, Felipe. So market size continues to be there, and the changing demographics will continue to make this market very attractive. The regulatory pressures will continue. There's no reason that these pressures actually will diminish, and that will drive as well as things that I said earlier on monitoring and compliance and so forth and so on. The market is much more sophisticated, and we will see more and more domestic companies elevating in the innovation space. You know, Hengwei is one that I can mention. There's a couple of other ones, CSPC and so forth and so on, that are really in leapfrogging. When you look at a statistic on or some data on portfolio research and molecules that are being developed by the, let's say, 20 top or 25 top pharmas in the world and how they rank. Actually, among them, you have already 5 Chinese these days. So I always, a bit provocative sometimes, I say the next EV revolution will come from the pharma space. I'm sure from that. So the Chinese originated innovation will become global. Pricing pressures will continue to be very high. Which means that people have to operate very effectively and look at their operations. Finally, the market price or attract the premium that the market is actually looking for continues to be high. There was a recent transaction of a British more consumer health company called Haleon that was buying out in 2 stages, their joint venture partner, which attracted billions of dollars of valuations actually. And that was for mainly toothpaste and related products. So think about that. So I guess to sum it up, the market is there. It has changed a lot. It's much more innovative driven. Risk and regulations will continue, and profitability is going to be key going forward for everyone. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jens, for the insightful presentation. Now I'd like to invite on the floor Hamish King, CEO at Cisema. I'll set up the slides for you.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me. My name's Hamish King. I'm CEO at Cisema. We are a regulatory consultancy wholly focused on the China market. I'm a lawyer by training, qualified in Australia and also Hong Kong, which has been my home for the last 10 years. I'm just going to talk for around 20 minutes, and please give me a wave if I'm going too long, about some recent registration trends, a broader framework overview for product registration in China, as well as some more specifics and alternative pathways. This may I hope it can still be relevant to everybody. It's focused on medical device. That's what I was asked to speak to. If you'd like to know more about pharma in particular, we can talk about that in the panel afterwards. And it's focused on product registration, but of course, we'll talk a little bit about post-market responsibilities as well. First, I just point out that the NMPA, the regulatory authority, based in Beijing, it issues an annual report each year which summarizes the product registration trends over the prior year. And I thought some data might be of interest to show, again, the market size and the increasing number of registrations that are occurring. In summary, the total number is a little over 13,000 in 2024. That includes new registrations, renewals, and product changes, with approximately a 2/3 device to 1/3 IVD split. The NMPA, of course, is the authority that reviews imported product registrations as well as Class 3 local registrations. So that's the high-risk registrations in China. As you can see, the trend over the last 7 years or so has been strongly upward, apart from the COVID-induced blip in 2022. So the number of registrations is continuing over time. If you'd like a copy of the slides, please let me know, and I think they might be circulated afterwards as well. In terms of importing a source of the registrations, US has been the top location from where medical device registrations have occurred over the last 10 years, with Germany number 2, Japan, South Korea, and then a number of other countries, and 5 of those top 10 are European countries. It's also important to note, and European products are still strongly in demand in the China market. So that's a few recent trends. With this slide, I'd just like to lay out a framework for you to think about product registration in case you are unfamiliar with how it works in China. On the left-hand side of the slide, as you look at it, we have what we call the standard registration, which is submitted to the NMPA, the National Medical Products Administration in Beijing. This registration process, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail shortly, but it requires a home country approval. So you need to have product approval in Europe or elsewhere, depending on where you're manufacturing, before you submit to the NMPA in Beijing. The next box along is what we call the innovative designation or green channel pathways. There are some special or specific priority review or emergency approval types, which I won't go into detail about, and that's perhaps less relevant overall. The idea of the innovative designation is very attractive. In practice so far, roughly 90 or 95% of those innovative designations have all been Chinese manufacturers. It is only, as far as I'm aware, Medtronic and Intuitive Surgical of the international companies which have obtained the innovative designation. and I presented with Intuitive and Medtronic last year in the MedTech conference in the US, where we discussed in detail around how, yes, this is an attractive pathway because it allows you to sit outside of some of the things that Jens was talking about, volume-based procurement, and it specifically gives you exemptions for those. The regulatory lead for Intuitive certainly was of the view that, look, this is really something that other companies should try, and she was very strongly encouraging them to do so. At Cisema, we are helping companies to submit, but some of the practical difficulties, particularly the China patent, which you must have before you can submit this innovative designation application, makes it in practice quite difficult for international companies entering the market. The other two buckets I just mentioned in summary, and I can talk about them in a little bit more detail shortly. The first is Hong Kong through to the GBA region. That has had some momentum in the last few years. Hong Kong, as you may be aware, is a different jurisdiction for the purposes of regulation of medical devices and pharma products. In fact, it's a voluntary listing. You don't need to register your product, your medical device, before you start selling it in Hong Kong market. You can start doing so tomorrow to private hospitals. But for public hospitals, public hospital tenders, there is now a mandate that products should be listed. And if they are listed and sold into public hospitals in Hong Kong, you can then apply to have them sold into the GBA region. That's 80 million people, and one of the wealthiest regions in China. The requirement is that it's, again, a relatively innovative product and that there's no similar products already for sale in China. In practice, what that means is that, and I've attended a number of roundtables with the Guangdong MPA who manages this submission process. In practice, that means one of the hospitals, and there are now 45 here, one of those hospitals needs to want your product. Because the hospital makes the submission to the local provincial authority. If the hospital says, we want this product, then that is what the provincial authority will take as, okay, that means that there's no similar product available and it is innovative. So in practice, that's our experience so far. And around 45 medical devices and 45 drugs have got the GBA Connect scheme so far. Hainan has a little bit of a longer history. It is the original pilot scheme was implemented 7 or 8 years ago, and there's a specific area in Hainan. I was actually there a couple of weeks ago for a delegation where they have really built a pilot zone for medical tourism out of the jungle. There's an interesting slide showing 2015. It was a small village in the jungle. 2025, there are now 18 hospitals which they have built. There is only one public hospital, however, and that's where most of the products will come, first of all. And the idea is that if you have approval elsewhere in the world, there is a very short timeline to permit you to sell your drug or your device into this region to cater for medical tourism. So that rather than Chinese nationals or others going to Thailand or Japan or elsewhere, they can go to Hainan instead. Again, the message is that Chinese patients want access to the latest drugs, the latest devices, and this is a nice way to capture the market. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but in practice for many SMEs, what I say is that everyone wants to know how can I do it faster? How can I do it cheaper or quicker? And these sound like attractive alternatives, and they can be in very specific circumstances. But in the vast majority of cases, I still strongly encourage you to look at what may seem the more boring option, but is the traditional registration at NMPA in Beijing. And that's sometimes what people don't necessarily want to hear, but that's our experience at Cisema. Okay, I'm just keeping track of time here, and please give me a wave if I'm chatting too long. I could talk about this all day, of course. Just briefly, because I'm sure many of you will be aware, but China has 3 risk classes for medical devices. Highest risk class is class 3. Broadly, those map to US or EU designations or classifications. Importantly, it's a catalog-based risk classification. So you really look up the list, and the most recent list was issued just a week ago, actually, with some updates. If your product does not appear on this list, you can apply to the NMPA in Beijing for a ruling. That application can take a couple of months or longer, and it can be quite a back and forth because you need to have some questions and answers with the authorities to inform them and discuss and finally get a ruling about your specific classification. Or even if it's non-medical, it might be in some cases that it's non-medical. And in approximately 5% of situations with our customers, we need to apply for a designation here. Again, I just go through quite briefly, maybe you're already aware, but for class 1 and 2 and 3 registration processes, I'm going to talk about some timelines. Class 1 is approximately a 2 to a 4 month timeline. It's a filing, and it is relatively straightforward. You just require some relatively basic documentation and then a submission at the authorities, and the certificate will be issued on the spot. On the other hand, a class 2 or 3 registration process is more like a 18-month for a class 2 or 21-month for a class 3 timeline. Again, we're talking really about imported products here. The key points, if you're not already aware, are as I've flagged on the slides. The product technical requirements are the specifications that are attached to your final certificate, and those need to be written quite carefully and also reviewed on an ongoing basis, because NMPA is increasingly active with post-market responsibilities and is inspecting and doing random sample inspections to check that the product specifications match to the PTR. So if, as is the case, a company came to us not long ago where NMPA had selected the product which is sold into the market. It was actually a dental product that was registered 15 years ago. That PTR was written with very tight specifications because the testing done at the time performed very well in the local test lab where it was done. So the PTR was written accordingly. And now NMPA has done some sampling and some tests and found that the testing does not match what the PTR says. That company, and I'll be given the five-minute warning here, that company has now had to withdraw the product from the market because it was not able to sufficiently justify those the testing specifications which it set out in its PTR. So you need to monitor and review your documentation on an ongoing basis, even if it's been in the market for a long time. Make sure you keep thinking about how that registration was done back in the day, and also it's a message for when you're registering now. You want to balance keeping those specifications relatively loose, whilst also sufficiently tight so that you can make your sales in the market. At a given time, I won't talk too much more, except to say, if you're not aware, you need to do testing again in China as part of your registration. That is done in local test labs. In some situations, there are exceptions, but we won't go into that now. The CER is the other important document, and that is not a translation of your CE mark CER. That really needs to be written again according to China specifications, and it takes a lot of work to do so. Otherwise, the process will look relatively familiar. And as I said, around 18 months for a class 2, 21 months for a class 3. This slide's a little bit busy, but it's just a framework to think about. A key part of your registration, do you need to do a China clinical trial? Because if you are a class 2 or a class 3 product, by default, the starting point is you need to do clinical trials in China as part of your registration. However, there's a number of ways to avoid this or to justify your performance and safety. Otherwise, the first is if it's a high-risk product, then it's quite clear you probably will need to do China trials if you haven't already. Otherwise, is it on an exemption list? There's a lengthy catalog here, and there's around 1,200 products that are exempt, specifically named as exempt. Otherwise, do you have local trial data done in home country or elsewhere? Or can you make a comparison versus an existing product on the market? That's the predicate pathway. Then you can write the CER. The final thing I'll mention, and then I think it will be time, is just to think about your local representative. There are various ways to enter the market or to continue in the market. One of those is using your commercial partner, your distributor. The other is with a more substantial operation of your own subsidiary or using a third party. The distributor option is what is the default in many markets. We caution companies about doing this for China specifically. One reason is IP risks, because you're going to need to provide very detailed information as part of your submission process. The local agent, the local authorized representative, is the one who handles and must submit that. Your own subsidiary is the belts and braces approach, but of course it takes time and money. A third party is also an option, and various companies act in this role. We also act in this role for many medical device companies. But just keep thinking through about your options and longer term, how does this fit with your strategy for the market? Okay, I've got a number of other slides which I won't go into detail about. I just mentioned very quickly that there's a new medical device law that has been issued, and that will remove, or is planned to remove, the country of origin requirements. So I talked before about how you need to have CE mark before you come to the market. That will no longer be the case if this law passes, if and when. It was issued for comments last year, at the end of last year. Originally, it was thought it might be implemented in 2025, but that now looks more like 2026, according to various people that I've heard. But who knows? But it's one to just keep an eye out for. There's also more emphasis on innovation, as we've heard, as a continuing theme. And otherwise continuing market surveillance, vigilance, all those hot topics. Okay, that's me there. As mentioned, we are a company of regulatory consultant based in Hong Kong, Beijing, Qingdao, and Munich, Germany, as well as a number of other countries where we have sales offices. The key message I want to leave is that if you're not in the market already, it is realistic and achievable to enter the market. It has its challenges. There is a very substantial market size. As we've heard from Jens, yes, there are challenges, but although pricing has reduced and as Medtronic, I was hearing from Medtronic just recently, they said that yes, pricing in China has reduced for them, but they still sell at a higher price than Germany. So their pricing, is sometimes comparable to other European countries, of course, depending on your market product and segment you're targeting. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Hamish, and thank you very much for flying in from Hong Kong this morning. Thank you very much for being here with us in presence. I think that now we can start with the panel discussion. The moderator of today is going to be Valtero Canepa, General Manager at Bracco Sine Pharmaceutical. You had the pleasure to familiarize with Jens and Hamish, but we also have Jintao Yu, so Sales Director for the China region at Copan. So we'll prepare the stage now, and I'll set up the slides, then we can start.
Good afternoon, everybody. We got several questions from the audience in advance of the meeting, pretty long list of questions. I tried to include some of them in the question I'm going to ask to the panelists. Before that, let me just introduce myself for a second. I work for an Italian group. It's called Bracco. It's a medical device and pharmaceutical because we do contrast agents, which are pharmaceutical. But we do some medical devices which are used together with the contrast agent or somehow by the same customers, and they are medical devices. So I have a double experience, and I'm managing the China operations of the Bracco Group. Is the second one in the world. We are a little bit over 200 million euro as a turnover here in China. So in line with what Jens was presenting, the market is pretty big and pretty interesting. But of course, there is some challenges that we all know we're trying to face. So let me ask first Jintao, because we didn't hear from him. He was not presenting. So maybe if you can spend a few minutes to introduce yourself, your company, and which product do you sell? But even more interesting, in line with the today seminar, I think, is to understand the way you are present in China, the way you enter the market, and why you choose that way.
Thank you, Valtero. So let me have briefly introduce myself and my company. My company called the Copa Group. We are beginning as an IVD company in Italy, and we produce collection transport devices. And now we're expanding to a new section. We say it's automation system in the microbiological laboratories. So we have been here in China almost 20 years, 16 years. And now I'm working as sales director for the Greater China region, so including the mainland China and Hong Kong and Macau. Our business presence here in China is not only the importation of our high-end products, but also a local production here. So we choose to combine these two ways here in China is because, first of all, the local production can help us to have high quality products, but with a competitive price here in Chinese market. All of us, we know the Chinese market is very competitive market. There are many Chinese competitors. There are even many international competitors. So for a reason why we choose this local production. And on the other hand, we have our high-end products. We do the importation of these high-end products. Just as Hamish said before, the importation local production is very money consumption and the time consumption. So first of all, we have to evaluate which product we bring here to Chinese market. And on the other hand, we also want to take a control over our strategic products in our headquarters. So we're evaluating which we bring here to China to have a local production, and we maintain our control on our strategic products. That's what we're doing here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jintao. I think I will borrow your mic and pass mine to Jens, because I want to ask you a question. There was a little mention about the tariff and the things we are facing today in the market. But I think we are not taking the big elephant in the room, which is many European companies, especially small ones and medium ones, are hoping that this trouble between US and China may create an opportunity for entering the market that maybe before they were not considering. Do you think this volatility in the market somehow could be positive for small and medium enterprise coming from Europe to the Chinese market?
The elephant in the room. I can be the elephant in the room, right? I think you've got to think of the way I would think of this is separate pharma from medtech, first of all, right? In the pharma space, getting a patient to do and take other therapies, solutions is not obvious, not that easy, right? So if you are someone that wants to enter the market today, I think and that's only engages myself here, it's you got to have a very differentiated solution that you bring to the market. Trying to compete in the generic space is going to be very, very tricky and very, very complicated. Some are trying to do partnership models with local companies and bringing their brand name to the market in that space. It is an option. I would say it's probably a more complex option. When it comes to the medtech space and tariffs, first of all, we all have to remember that supply chains of this world are seldom straight. They go in, in zigzags, in Z or Y, and Y forms, but not straight lines. So actually, the data that I have looked at, while probably top 25 global pharmas do import around about 50% of their products into China these days, okay? Some of the US companies in that 25 sample, some are more 60, 70, and some are 90%. But that's also because they have elected to play in that very innovative space and therefore have not localized anything in the country. But very few of them import directly out of the US. Many are using lots of European intermediate countries. Ireland is one, but there's others in that space. So the tariff and trade debates that we see between US and China these days, I don't think it's a particular opportunity, so to say. It really boils down to, do you have the right product, and can you really compete in this market? That's my view.
I agree with you, by the way. But Hamish, maybe he doesn't.
Well,
So
I mean, the only thing I would add there is that, talking to some of our customers many who are European SMEs, I'm talking medtech here rather than pharma, are, for example, there's a relatively large Spanish ophthalmology company, and a lot of their competitors in China are US manufactured products. And so, a China medical equipment fair where we were a month or so ago, chatting, and they're thinking, hang on a second, our primary competitors in the market suddenly have to reprice their goods or suffer serious margin. This seems like a big opportunity to me. How will that play through over time? It takes a long time to play through, sure, but I think it is worth mentioning that there are real opportunities in life and buying.
If you already are in the market, there may be opportunities, but that's not a good reason to enter the market, if I can summarize. So you can keep the microphone because I want to elaborate a little bit. It was already mentioned a little bit about localization, and you mentioned localization as well. Maybe American companies, especially for innovative product, they do not localize so much. So I would like to take a localization from somehow 3 different points of view. But first of all, you mentioned some way to localize. You say maybe they're not as nice as they could be, like the 2 special areas, the GBA and the BOAL. But beside that, even when you go to the national registration normal channel, do you see differences between importing? I mean, we were talking before the panel. My feeling is that in some situations, when you import a product, somehow it's easier to continue to import that product rather than localize the product. Because when you localize, you have to go through the new standard, you have to go through new regulations, which maybe were a little bit more tougher than the one that you were facing with when you registered the product maybe 10 years ago or even more. So is it something that you see with your customers? Do they consider this in their strategy for localization? Do they see the hurdles of localizing the products?
So in terms of localization, I mean, the first thing we should say, of course, is that it relates to was it Order 551 or in 2021, I think, when there was and it's not publicized, but there is a strong preference mandated to public hospitals to purchase Chinese products, Chinese domestically manufacturing products. Whether that's necessarily against, whether that should be correct or not is another issue, and perhaps that's why it's not widely publicly publicized. And I'm aware that there have been strong submissions by various countries to say this is not in accordance with World Trade Organization rules, that you should not prefer just on the basis of manufacturing spot where a product is manufactured. That's a roundabout way of saying, that's the starting point. But there have been other preferences or other regulations that permit localization of products. For example, if you have an imported certificate, that's a product that's already registered as manufactured in Italy, and then you want to manufacture it in China. There is a specific pathway that permits for a much faster registration timeline, provided you move most of your, or rather all your manufacturing, including R&D, to China for this product. And some companies, as we've heard, are hesitant to do that. At first, that wasn't fully clear that you need to move everything, and it was more a discussion at a provincial level. But we've heard of one or two customers who've discussed with the provincial authorities, and although this is an Irish manufacturing facility, they want to localize to China. They actually were told, if you move all the manufacturing that you have in Ireland to China, that won't be enough, because the way they manufacture in Ireland is effectively an assembly plant with a software add-on, and they get most of the other components from other third parties. So there are real practical difficulties about localizing, and there's a strategic consideration about localizing. And another challenge is, as you said, for more legacy or older products that perhaps were registered in Europe under MDD, and so therefore they may be self-declared, or they may not require the same amount of clinical data that the new MDR regulation requires in Europe, and therefore they don't have sufficient data to register in China as a local product or necessarily imported product. Don't forget that whether you're imported or local, imported or local, you still technically go through the same registration process and requirements. The only difference in theory is that your review is at a provincial level if you're a class 2 or below. And so that's in practice what makes the difference, because each province competes to attract manufacturing base and also reduce the application fee, so on. So I've probably wandered on a little bit too long, but that's some of my thoughts about localization.
Thank you. We can talk an hour just on localization probably, but about localization, I want to hear, because you already mentioned that you made the decision to localize some part of your portfolio as a production. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the localization of the management as well? I mean, product and management, do they go together, or there is a disalignment, there is a difference in the way you consider localization?
Yeah, it's really a good question. So for our side, the localization is two parts for me. One is the product side, is the production here in China. So you have your supply chain localized, you have your production personnel here localized, but on the other hand, you also have your the personal side of localization. So you need your management team localized, and you also have your regulation team localized, you have your quality team localized. This is also essential for me to an international company who want to have a development here in China, to have a more market share in China, because it's essential for you to understand better your market. You have quickly decision making here in China, and it can also bring you another advantage, that you can understand better the situation. You can have better market awareness here in China. But for me, it's not only the positive prospect, but also some negative prospect. From what I can feel in my experience, the management level localization, it should be very tricky to have a balance between you localize your decision. Okay, you can understand the market. Okay, but you also may be risk to have a misalignment with your headquarter. So it's what the localized local team to have to consider. You have to balance the international, the global headquarter perspective, their global strategy alignment with your local team. You have to give them feedback of the local market, of your local partnership with the local regulation. Back to your headquarter, you have to open discussion with your headquarter to have a total alignment to achieve this localization goal. So localization is not only one side of localization, but also very important to align with your headquarter. It's my opinion.
Thank you. That's an interesting point of view. Maybe we have later on again the opportunity to elaborate a little bit of this. But to conclude the topic of organization, I would like to come back to something which was mentioned. You're right, it was not public, the famous directive Data 551. But the European Union recently made an opinion saying that, yes, China is actually somehow infringing and somehow using unfair competition practices. Now, I don't disagree. It's not the point about that. But my question to Jens is, do you see differences in the market access in the public tenders, specifically in healthcare, because hospitals are mostly public, not just healthcare, but let's talk about healthcare today, between companies which are localizing and companies which are localizing much less, let's say? For the lawyer. You have a lot of
It's a question for the lawyer here, right? Not for me, right?
It's not a legal question. It's more a practical.
Valtero, I go back to what I said earlier. The quality of the treatment and perception of the quality of the treatment continues to be the driver of the market. And that's where, I guess, domestic companies continue to struggle with. Therefore, even HCPs, they might be instructed or guided to make prescriptions from a particular market segment, but they don't do that because they themselves have a bit of a difficulty to believe in the efficiency of these solutions. There have recently been lots of media, probably many of you have seen that, lots of media reports around a couple of generic drugs, Chinese locally manufactured, that were supposedly not up to the level that they were supposed to do, supposed to be, and so forth and so on. And then patients in this country, I mean, in many other countries as well, but here in particular, I would say, are becoming much more savvy. They do check themselves, as to what should I be treated with, and what's the best product in town, and that's what they basically also tell the HCP, that the doctor who's making the prescription, to say, no, I don't want that one, I want another one. If the doctor doesn't want it, remind everyone that out-of-pocket expenses in the country is one of the highest ratios around the world, 30+%. I mean, I'll go to a doctor in France. I don't maybe have 2% out-of-pocket expenses eventually, right? And depending on the insurance coverage you have, 30%, and the 30%, behind that 30%, there's also choices that people are actually making. So I'm not sure whether I answered your question here, but I try to avoid that.
No, I think you are. No, I think you are. You're talking about quality, which I think is a very important topic, and perception of quality, which is also interesting.
Yeah, and just to respond, it's probably going off topic a little bit, but in terms of my anecdotal experience of Chinese consumers, is they are very savvy compared to most other countries. You talked about if you go to the doctor in Australia or in Germany, the doctor prescribes you something, then you probably just take it. Whereas, yeah, it's in my experience, people here, they will research, they will check, is it registered, or, and that's whether that's for beauty products or consumer products as well. There's real savviness and understanding and research into specific products. Yeah, so I think that's worth remembering for companies who are entering the market. Those who are here probably will be more aware of that.
That's an important topic. Keep the microphone, please, because I want to jump to another topic, which is somehow already mentioned by you. You say you have different way to enter the market, and if you give the license of operating to your distributor, you have some risk. Actually, recently, I was talking at the CMAF with a company, a small, I would say medium, not so small, European company that they were very accept because they saw in the same fair one of their distributor. They closed the deal with they closed the business with them like a year ago, but that distributor was present at the fair with a machine. They do a little device for blood, blood separation, with a machine which was basically equal or very similar to there, even with a name which was very similar. And the logo was also very similar. So this is something, when I talk with companies in Europe, this is something which is scaring still a lot of companies. I think we need to talk about this. We cannot avoid this topic.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a key risk that must be addressed head on, because IP is very important. Companies spend a lot of money to get their innovative products, to get their products to market, and you want to protect that IP when you come to the market. I mean, we won't dive into the IP laws, and I'm not an IP expert or lawyer. There's plenty of people, and I'm sure European Chamber can help you as well in some detail to give relevant advices. But there's just some important structural things you should think about when you're entering the market, or if you're already here, that are worth remembering. And one is, how do you work with your local partner? It's a different market compared to Saudi Arabia or an African market or South America, where you just find a distributor and they say, we're going to give you these volumes over here, over everything else, done. For China, no, you need to be more thoughtful and structured about it. Think about your commercial and your regulatory. Ideally, keep them separate unless it's wholly owned. That is my advice from seeing. Unfortunately, many companies have similar experiences who sort of barreled in headlong, saying, hey, we've got this great distribution partnership. I just need to send these documentation and off we go. But you have to submit very detailed information as part of your submission process, as I talked about. The leakages of IP, in my experience, never happen at the authority, at the regulatory authority. So if you submitted your dossier to the NMPA, that is not something that's going to go public. However, if you go through a third party, a distributor who usually have manufacturing capabilities in their own right, that's when you often find suddenly copycat products down the road. The final thing I mentioned about IP is that over the last few years, even China is doing a lot to strengthen IP. And even a week or two ago, there's been a new release relating to an overall IP framework. There's more IP laws and protections coming in. And so if you do find yourself subject to such copycats, I would also strongly encourage you to try to fight it. Don't just sit back and say, oh, okay, well, that's China. No, that's how it is. No, you should really pursue it in the courts. The European Chamber also has resources who can help you and advise you who to talk to. And there have been very many instances of recoveries and taking those products down at exhibitions or trade fairs or elsewhere. So,
since we have here a company, I would like to hear, how do you protect your technology from local competitors?
Of course, I think the copycat issue we say is every one of us and most of us are suffering here in China, and we're facing this problem here in China. The same things happen to our company Coupang, and we do in several ways to protect our IPs. The first of all, of course, our IP rights is everyone does, but we also do our product differentiation by collaborating with different university, different great research all over the world. They just publish different theses using our products in the IVD sector. So the local doctors, the local researchers, they just read, share the different theses, different research, different practical application, and they can understand the differentiation that we have from our product to other copy products here in China. And then we also keep our innovation to push out different new products to adapt the new trend of the market to responding the market needs. And beside all of this, as I just said, our Coupang is not only have collection transport devices, which is consumable, IVD consumables, but also automation systems. We combine our portfolio of our products to have a total solution to offering to local customers. And with this total solution, it's very few competitors can do the same things because they are all focused on one of the many things or another. But it's a few of them can combining, like us, the consumables plus the automations to have a total solution for our end customer to have a brand value here in the market. So with this different, we say, the way direction to protect our IPs, I think we are doing very well here in Chinese market.
Thank you. We got questions from the audience online. So Filippo suggested that we can project them and maybe whoever can take it. Let's see, depends on the topic, of course. We go without net. We like that. What is the impact of VBP on the availability of newly developed innovative drugs? Perhaps as such low margins, company may not be very willing to include their latest innovative drug in the VBP, consider that R&D cost can be very huge. Maybe I can take this because as a pharma company, actually, very innovative drugs do not go through VBP. Maybe we need to, it was said by Jens, correct, but it's talking about VBP. So just to make sure there is no misunderstanding, if you have an innovative drug which still has a patent, you will not go through VBP. You may go through VBP at the provincial level, even in case you do not have generics, because this is not a real VBP, it's more a negotiation with the provincial authorities. They don't want to spend, we have seen the increase of the cost of health care in China. They want to reduce the cost, but that's not really VBP. So it's actually a negotiation. Usually the price cut in that case doesn't go over 20%, 25%. So I'm not saying it's good, but it's not dramatic like we have seen in some of the national VBP procedures. And DRL is a different story. And DRL means that you get the registration, and then if you want, you get the reimbursement. Then, yes, in the RNDR process, you have a negotiation, and usually China is challenging. Recently, even more than in the past, prices are usually not the highest in the world. They always look at price in the other countries. They also look at the price of somehow competitive product. I'm not saying generic, but competitive product of the same class, same type in China. So it might be tough to get a good price, but this is not preventing to bring innovative drugs. So it's not VBP preventing, it's other reasons maybe. And some companies decided actually to go for non-reimbursement. There is still drugs which are sold completely out of pocket, and companies prefer to sell less, probably, but much better margin. So we have seen this. So there is a question to Hamish. you mentioned that when applying to MRA for classification, it might be the case that the product is not considered medical at all. Could you provide a concrete example?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Just because it comes to mind, it came recently. There's sort of a medical bath, during pregnancy in hospital. In the UK, I think it's classified as a class 1 product, but in China, it's not necessarily medical. So that's an example. But yeah, the software is the more obvious situation, where it's a product that could be medical, could be non-medical, and you want some clarity, and MPA can give that clarity with an application, but unfortunately not always. And sometimes what happens in practice is they ask more questions until you give up. So it can take a 6 or 9 month period, and you keep getting asked more and more questions. Tell me more about the product. Tell me more about the product. And you can keep going if you want to, but it may be that you won't get a ruling in practice at all.
Filippo, how many minutes we have? Very good. I don't see many other slides online. You mean what are the IP implications during the registration process? What is required to be disclosed?
IP implications. So during registration, you need to provide very detailed data about your product, because you need to demonstrate safety and efficacy, just as you do at other jurisdictions around the world. And strategies to mitigate those risks are: be careful about, diligence your partners very well. If you're using a third-party agent, then at least make sure you do the basics. Sign confidentiality agreements. Have your your ducks lined up in a row there, and think about separating regulatory and commercial. It's not to say that many companies haven't succeeded by using a distributor, but it's just something to be aware about as part of the process.
Thank you. I think we have 1 minute. I have a last question for Jens, because there is it was one of the questions from the audience before, so I want to tackle that. Many Chinese companies are going global now. Do you see this just as a challenge for European small and medium enterprise, or potentially as an opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, Valtero, while I've said earlier there was this trust issue here on Chinese drugs, I'm a believer that the quality of the innovation that we see here in the country in the pharma space will just continue. In the medtech space is already there. The next global pharma will come out of China. I'm a strong believer in that. There have been recently some announcement on some, I think it was a breast cancer or something like that. I saw something that was labeled by some of the I think European media as the deep seek in the pharma space. Yes, we will see Chinese products become blockbusters around the world. BeiGene is already selling billions of US in the US market. It's Chinese assets at the end of the day. So I think that trend is there. Will it accelerate? Yes, I do think so. So yeah, that's my view. So from a competitive perspective, for those that are operating without Chinese competitors at the moment, be careful, watch out.
I think we can close here. Thank you. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the audience and to the audience online.